Hello, and you are very welcome back to Davinci Resolve A to Z, your one-stop for all things Davinci Resolve. And in today's episode, we take on a subscriber requested video, and that is how to work with Blackmagic RAW. This subscriber asks, would it be possible to do a video with regards to working with / color grading Blackmagic RAW? I've been struggling with really grasping HDR and SDR outside of Rec 709 deliverables using my Pocket Cinema 4K. I've been sticking with Rec 709 SDR because Rec 2020 seems so different and the scopes for grading HDR just seems so confusing, not to mention the HDR mode in the color tab, right clicking on a node when working in Rec 709. If you could simplify all this, it would be super amazing. So the thing about this request is I think there's kind of two separate entities in here that need to be separately addressed in two different videos so that the two don't get conflated, because I don't want anyone coming away thinking that either or goes hand in hand. So in this video, we're going to address working with Blackmagic RAW, and in a separate video, we're going to address the whole HDR workflow thing, because believe me, I feel your pain. I only recently wrapped my head around the HDR workflow and it took quite a bit of research. So I'm definitely lining up making a video to condense what I learned and hoping that the way that I dumbed it down for myself can work for you, the viewer, as well. So that will be coming up very soon too. Now, this subscriber was actually kind enough to take some time and find a website where you can download some free Blackmagic RAW footage. So if you are like me and you don't have a modern Blackmagic camera and couldn't shoot any Blackmagic RAW footage, you can go to the link in the description, download that footage and still follow along directly here. So with that bit of stuff cleared up and out of the way, let's jump into Resolve and take a look at working with Blackmagic RAW. So to begin with, and just to cover all bases, when you open up the color tab, you will probably have a user interface similar enough to this. And if you've already worked with some RAW files, or if you've explored the UI quite a bit, you'll already know about coming over to this icon here to open up your camera RAW tab. And as you can see, there's quite a few settings going on in here. And while this video is not meant to be trying to, do a deep in-depth look at what RAW is, we do kind of need to take a very brief bullet point look at what RAW is for some of these settings to make sense, and for this pipeline of image processing to work and to understand it. So if I just come over to this image here on Google, this is from No Film School, you can see that the raw image here without any processing looks quite funky. It looks like something a cross between something out of the Matrix and what Predator sees, and then you can kind of see the same for the log and the Rec 709 video. The thing about RAW is, and I'm really paraphrasing here, is a lot of settings that you typically bake into a standard codec, like, insert codec here, are baked in, whereas RAW they're not. So for the really major ones that we tend to play around with a lot in post would be the ISO and the color temperature. Those settings don't get baked in to the camera. So when you go grading RAW files and you go changing brightness values and you go changing color temperature values, you're going to get the same quality as if you had actually shot those values in camera versus actually tweaking from those baked in values in camera and start degrading the image. So that's one of the big pluses. And because there's all these multiple values that have not really been set in place yet, a raw image looks quite funky. And that kind of brings us to our first setting here, which is decode using, and this whole tab in general. This is our first line of attack towards processing a raw image, because what this does is it defines some of those variables so that you get a viewable looking image. That's why this doesn't look all funky, is because we are currently processing the raw image into some sort of viewable, at least to our eyes, viewable image. And by default, you will probably end up having it be decode using Blackmagic RAW default. So it's recognized that it's a Blackmagic RAW file and is doing a kind of bare minimum set of values to give us a viewable image, so we don't end up having something that looks like the Matrix here and making us think, oh my god, my graphics card's after going busted or something like that. And then this decode quality is full, half, quarter res and 1/8 res, or use project settings, which if we open up our project settings over here and come to camera raw, you can see we've got that set to full res. And the only thing I'll say about decode quality here is you can probably leave it at full res on most machines. Obviously see how your playback is functioning, but I'm on a pretty old machine, and this is a UHD clip, for example, and it's a raw file, and I'm getting real-time playback on that. It's a 60 frames per second clip, but I've conformed it to 25 frames, and that's real-time playback, no problem. So for the most part, I'd say decode quality, you'll be fine leaving that on full. And then next we have to look at the different decode using methods. So Blackmagic RAW default, like I said, it's just a base number of values to give you some sort of viewable image for the most part. That's just kind of what it's for. Next option is camera metadata. So as I said, when you shoot RAW, you have all these values that are not actually technically defined or baked in, so you would have a very hard to view image. If we bring that up again, you can't judge anything off of that. So even when we're shooting RAW in camera, we still set an ISO, and we still set a color temperature, and we still set color spaces. And that is just so that the camera gives us something on the monitor that we can view. But when you're shooting RAW, you're really still retaining all of those options. So the camera metadata basically is like, this is what the DOP kind of set the settings to, and odds are it's a good starting point for your grade. So what that will do is it'll decode and send your image into the rest of your pipeline for further manipulation based on what the camera settings were. But that locks off all the options for us to adjust them. So next down in the list is project. And all this is you can see it jumped there, because if we come into our project settings in camera raw here, what do we have? So we've got the raw profile is set to something wrong. So let's change that to Blackmagic RAW for a start. Full res is fine, and decode using project is turned on. If you go to something else, the settings here will be grayed out. So make sure you come down to project. And in here, you can now make a lot of adjustments that are here, but apply them to any clip in your timeline that you have set the decode using to project. So basically, you can make sweeping adjustments to multiple clips very quickly here. And the benefit of this is you've done your settings in here, and you come into another clip and you switch that over to project. You might very well not like the results on that one clip and the rest look fine, in which case you can come down to clip, and now you're going into this full manual. Let's make adjustments, fine adjustments to just this shot on a clip to clip basis, so you're not doing sweeping things. So speaking of that, let's come back to this first clip and let's open up clip so that we can go through the rest of the settings. Now what I will say is, depending on what camera raw file you're working with, whether it be Red RAW or Canon RAW or Sony RAW, these values and options might differ a little bit. Color space and gamma will have different options that you can conform to. I've noticed, for example, exposure, what kind of values you adjust by are just different quantities or definitions, but you can still just adjust stop at a time. So just an example of that. If you're in ARRI RAW, it'll be by ASA, so 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200 to go up in intervals of one stop at a time. But if you switch over to Canon RAW, it's as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stops increments. So little things like that can vary. So nothing's, that's nothing wrong. It's just, down to what settings the manufacturers decided are the best way to adjust their raw files with. So it's very specific and integrated into Resolve. But with Blackmagic RAW, this is what you'll see. So color science is grayed out just because it's on version 4 now. That's the latest, and it's the only color science that Blackmagic RAW has. I would imagine in the future you will get more options as they update their color science available and as things go on. Then you can adjust white balance to presets here, or you can go full custom over here and really get adjusting your white balance. And again, the real power of RAW is, if I bring that back to like say 5600, a more reasonable color temperature, is there is no difference between adjusting your color temperature here in terms of any the degrading of the image that may happen versus if you would set the camera to that and baked in that ISO. You have so much flexibility, and it is the exact same with the ISO. So imagine, if you will, we were running and gunning and we set our ISO to 1000 in camera and lots of information got clipped. Well, because it's RAW, we can just switch over to a more reasonable ISO, say like 400, the camera's native, and you can see, at least with this frame, nothing's clipped. So you can really bounce around there and fine tune your image without any real degradation to the image. Now, color space and gamma, the only thing worth noting here for the most part, I would say, is, as I've said, this is your first step in the image processing pipeline. So if you go and, so Blackmagic Design and Blackmagic Film are the defaults there because that's what it was shot in, and those are the biggest color spaces that this file will exist as. If you go and make it something like Rec 709 and Blackmagic Design Extended Video, for example, so we'll just rein in those values a bit better, and we'll do a rough Rec 709 conversion. As you start making adjustments in here, you are only working with a more limited color space and gamma. This is bottlenecking you. So fair enough, if you need a quick and simple Rec 709 conversion, you're just trying to do a quick turnover, by all means, use something like that. But if you're looking to get really creative and want maximum flexibility with your image, I would leave those as the biggest possible color space, which will be natively what I was shot at typically. So in this case, Blackmagic Design for color space and Blackmagic Design Film, aka the log profile on the Blackmagic cameras. And then the rest is really self-explanatory, because if you've been grading in Resolve, you know all of these and what they all mean pretty much. Basically, you can do all your primaries within the RAW tab and send out a really nice, well-processed RAW image to something that's viewable and usable into the rest of the image pipeline process for your creative grading. One more thing I'd like to look at then is highlight recovery, because it's a very nice feature. So this, we look at this image and we can look at our scopes, we can see there's nothing clipping or blown out, but as the camera pans and the helicopter is going off into the distance, you see quite a lot is going off our scopes there. So we could maybe lower ISO, but you know, there's still a lot clipped there. But what we can do is turn on highlight recovery, and you can see we actually get quite a lot of information back in. Now some of it is still just straight up well and truly clipped, but now I'm going to leave this back at 400, the native ISO, and just simply pull in like this. But you can see if I toggle on and off the highlight recovery, just how much information we're actually getting back into the image. So I've been really impressed with how well this feature works. It's something I must look into more to really truly understand what's going on. So let's come back here and we might drop those values down a bit, and we might just bring our kind of mid values down a small bit more, just to be on the kind of more tonal side. And if we just give a bit of extra saturation there, and what we might do is come into our vector scope. We're looking okay there. I'll use waveform and turn off luminance there. Definitely still on the greeny side, so I might go quite high on the tint there to 20. And just like that, we've done quite a good set of primary adjustments to quite a workable image, and we'll just scrub through, make sure there's nothing funky happening out there. You know, pretty good starting point to then go into the rest of your image pipeline, whether that be using color management, LUTs, or fully manual adjustments with multiple nodes. That's up to you. So that's most of those settings pretty much in a nutshell. The only other thing that I think is cool to talk about is just another example of the highlight recovery. So we'll be really quick and rough and tumble with this. We'll just turn back on luminance here. So we've switched over to clip. Let's for argument's sake do camera metadata. So that's happens to be the same as what the DOP shot on today say. So we'll pull down and come back to clip, and we'll do highlight recovery. And again, you can see we just get that little bit more information. And if we zoom in, you can see it here in the snow. What looked like was fully blown out and lost, we get some bits of detail in that snow there. And then again, here we see it where pull down those values, click highlight recovery, and we're getting entire reflections back here from it no longer getting lost in the blown out areas of that snow in the background and stuff. So it's really, really impressive stuff. If I just come to this last clip here, just so you know, this is an additional clip that I ended up downloading from the Blackmagic website. They actually have quite a bit of footage there too. So in here, if we switch to camera metadata, you can see that there's the Sidecar file is actually doing quite a lot of adjusting for us in quite a nice way. But that's kind of like a different story. It's a file that you can save and send off with a raw file that contains newer metadata beyond what was on camera shot on the day, where if you've made adjustments and you're sending off to someone else, those raw adjustments that you made can kind of be sent along with that file, but it's not altering anything, it's not baking anything in, it's just more metadata. But we can come into clip here, and what we'll do here is we'll start making some rough adjustments. We'll pull down, go highlight recovery to see what else is out there, and that's great. We get a lot of extra information there again. We'll bring down these shadows, we'll go quite crunchy, and let's see where our mids are sitting there. Probably come a small bit up on those mids just for the skin tones, something like that. And then we might go and give some saturation into that. I go a little bit more. And our color temperature is looking pretty good. So the last kind of party trick that we'll look at to do a Blackmagic RAW, and this tends to go hand in hand with most RAW files, is a higher bit depth. In the case of Blackmagic RAW, we get access to 12 bit depth of 12. And why is that important, and why do we care? Well, if we look at the calculation for bit depth, which is so for 8-bit we go 2 to the power of 8. Here's a number we've all seen before, 256 shades of color to make up a gradient. This is why with 8-bit you often see banding, because with really subtle gradients, 8-bit just typically doesn't have enough subtle shades of that color to recreate that gradient digitally, so you end up with the artifact of banding, which is why if we clear that and go 2 to the power of 10, so 10-bit, we get way more colors to play with to recreate those subtle gradients and stuff, which is why when we clear that and go 2 to the power of 12, we get 4096 colors to play with. So you're just getting way more. So just 2 extra bit depth gives you way more colors to play with. So you get really nice footage as a result of that. Less artifacting and such other things like that improve. So what does that mean practically for us outside of just less artifacts? Well, when it comes to creative grading, it becomes really easy to make clean qualifications. So 8-bit footage is just super tough, in my opinion, to get clean qualifications on. You often have to just jack up your blur radius to make it not do that kind of blocky, jittery, jumpy stuff when you make adjustments. 10-bit is good, but still requires a bit of attention to detail. 12-bit makes it go borderline autopilot. You are just left pretty much to do a lot of creative thinking. So just for argument's sake, let's just go with a new node, and then we'll also go Alt-L as a layer mixer, and on the top node we'll do our qualification, and we'll just grab some skin tones there, and with just one click, if we turn on the highlight feature here, straight away we've got quite a clean key, and you know, a little bit of extra adjusting and you should get something that's quite usable for only being just the skin tones. And of course you're never going to get these out because these are also sharing that skin tone space, but you can see how quickly we landed on very acceptable qualification. So a hint of denoising and just some cleanup of the white, smidgen of cleanup of black, a small bit of blur radius, and we've gotten our skin tones isolated, and that frees us up to do your kind of usual bits of corporate, clean, kind of steely, kind of nice looking, contrasty image. So, you know, very basic stuff there as far as a grade goes, but the point there was to show just how easy certain things and creative decisions in the grading process become when you're working in 12-bit. And I think that's kind of where I'll sign off on this as far as talking about Blackmagic RAW and the process of working with it, because ultimately what it's about is becoming accessible to a lot more filmmakers. Typically to get 12-bit, you were looking at shooting Red RAW, which would be 16-bit, Sony RAW 16-bit as well, I think, or Canon RAW, and they're very expensive cameras. Even renting them can be very expensive. And then on top of that, quite a lot of processing power was needed. Cinema DNG was something that was a lot more accessible. For example, I have access to Cinema DNG. I had it on my pocket cinema camera, the original, and I also have on my Atomos Shogun Inferno. But it's so processor intensive, and that's where Blackmagic is coming in with Blackmagic RAW. It's accessible, it's open source, it's going to end up on a lot of cameras. They're putting it out there for free. It's 12-bit, it's low data rates, it writes to cheap SSDs, and it plays very, very well with NLEs. As you saw on my computer, quite an old system, but I got real-time playback with a 4K file. That's the power of Blackmagic RAW. So hopefully that clears up a little bit of kind of questions about Blackmagic RAW. Now the second part of the question from the subscriber was to do with grading for HDR, and I'm going to do a separate video on that, as I said, because I think really if I did a video here where I just graded a clip of Blackmagic RAW to HDR, I don't think we'd actually get a whole lot out of that. I think what I'm best doing is doing a video on HDR as a concept and getting you, the viewer, to come away from that video understanding HDR, and therefore it doesn't matter what file you're working with, whether it be log of some sort of flavor of log or a raw file, you'll just understand the image pipeline process and be able to get any image into HDR and understand the workflow. So I think that'll benefit everyone better. So stick around for that, because that'll be coming up very soon. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Did I miss something that should have been covered in this tutorial? Let me know in the comment section below so I know to cover it in a future episode. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. My name is Lee Dalton. This is Davinci Resolve A to Z. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.